Hello. Welcome back to Becoming Chiron, the key to unlocking healing and personal alchemy. With me, your hostess, Ursula Duffy. And this episode is the first episode of what I'm starting as season 2. And I'm so very excited to be getting into these topics with you all this time around. If you're new here, if you're a new listener, I highly recommend going and listening to season 1 in its entirety in order. And that'll give you a pretty good idea for what this podcast is all about and my intentions for starting it and what we're going to be getting into now with season 2. My intention for season 2, as I've mentioned a couple times in the last few episodes of last season, is to really get to the nitty-gritty of what Chiron means astrologically through the houses in your natal chart, as well as through the signs. And I'll be pulling a lot from, as I mentioned, Barbara Hand Clow's book about Chiron called The Rainbow Bridge. And I'll be sharing initially, just like I did last time, I'm going to start with a 3-part series about my own more intimate details, things that I've alluded to in last season about my own journey of having Chiron in the first house of my natal chart and all of the unique things that have come up throughout my life with my body and my health that are definitely, I think, related mostly to Chiron in the first house of my chart, but also to having Pluto in the 6th house of my chart. So we'll get into all of that. We're going to start today off. I have a lot of notes. I have a whole list of the interesting health challenges that I've experienced throughout my life up to this point. So I'm going to go through those today. And then the second part will be more about my self-healing journey, particularly what I learned about dietary things, food, what's in our food, and how I've healed my body through dietary changes over the years. And then the last part of this 3-part series will be just general information about Chiron in the first house. And I'm born with Chiron and Taurus, so I'll talk a bit about my experience with that as well. So as we do, before I get into the bones of this episode, I'm going to go over our Astro Weather Check. And as I said in the email that I sent out, if you're an email subscriber, and I definitely mentioned it in the last episode, there was some kind of construction happening. It's been ongoing now for over a month on my street. And I'm finally here sitting, recording with you today in peace and quiet for the first time in over a month, as the construction started pretty much right outside my window. So they're working down the street at this point. There should not be any background noise or interruptions. If there's any beeping or anything that you're hearing in the background, I apologize for it. I'm not too skilled at this point in audio recording or audio editing. So if it's there, I have to leave it, and I apologize, but we should be good. We should be good to go. It's finally the way it normally is here in Atlantic City. Peace and quiet in the off season, which I'm very grateful for. This whole thing has been incredibly disruptive. So beyond the delay, here we go. Today is Tuesday, October 18th. I hit record right around 8:30. And this time around, we're kind of on the cusp, on the brink of a few pretty rocky months as far as the astro weather goes. We are currently under the energy of 2 very intense squares that we will continue to be under pretty much for the rest of the year. One of those squares is the ongoing square between Saturn and Uranus. And right now they're about 1 degree apart from each other. And this is the energy that we were under pretty much most of 2021. And now at the end of 2022, it's back. So we have Saturn at 18 degrees of Aquarius, squaring Uranus at 17 degrees of Taurus. And these 2 planets, Saturn relates to our sense of duty and responsibility and karma to an extent, and our personal authority in general. And Uranus is the rebel, so, and the innovator, and I just want to do what I want to do. I want to do it my way. And it's this creative energy. It's this energy of individuation. I talked all about Uranus in last season, and I talked about Saturn as well in my Saturn return episode, which was episode number 8 of season 1. So squares, like we've talked about over and over again, we've always got these squares, and they're like calls to action. They create tension, and they force us in a way energetically to push forward or stay stuck. And that's what this energy is all about. It'll be more specific to you depending on what parts of your chart this is happening, but we're under this energy yet again. Think about the real grittiness that we all went through collectively in 2021, like pretty much the entire year. And we're revisiting this once again. And then they will separate, they will go their own ways, and we won't be under this energy again for many, many years. So we have that going on simultaneously with Mars square Neptune, which is a very different energy. We have Mars on the brink of its retrograde in Gemini, and Neptune in the sign of Pisces, which has been in since 2012. The Mars retrograde, I will be providing much more content and information about that. I'll also put a link in the show notes to a piece that I've already written that touches briefly on the vibe, the feeling. I pulled in some of the channeled symbols from the zodiac in the piece that I wrote, so I'll provide a link to that. So the Mars retrograde begins on October 30th, so that's close. And Mars is slowing down at this point. And I can personally share not specific details about what this means to me and how I've been experiencing this personally, not at this point, but overall feelings of sadness, grief, disappointment, that was like all last week. And the way that this is playing out in my own chart is extremely interesting. So like I said, with the Saturn Uranus, it's also going to be very specific to you based on what this is happening in your own chart, which houses these squares are happening in. So I talked all about Neptune in my Mighty Squares episode last season. So you can go back and listen to that for way more detail about Neptune. And I'll provide the resource for Mars. But in general, Neptune does relate very much to grief and our spirituality on a much larger sense, like our place in source to an extent. It also can relate very much to addiction and escapism and just feelings of confusion. And like I shared in the Mighty Squares episode, it's where in our lives we get to be the martyr or the mystic. And then Mars is our drive, it's our will, how we express aggression, anger, and our motivation. It's our divine masculine to a big extent. And when these two planets square each other, the vibe is interesting because Mars just wants to do things and move forward, but now we have Mars kind of slowing down on the brink of its own retrograde period. And this vibe of just being sad or melancholic or confused, but not really being able to put your finger on it and not really knowing how to act upon it is how I can relate the feeling of this square, personally and collectively. So we have those two very intense squares happening simultaneously, like I said. We have the moon waning through the sign of Leo right now. We had the full moon, it was on October 11th or 12th, I think. That was a really intense full moon. It was a full moon in Aries. The moon was conjunct Chiron, so lots and lots of healing opportunities and things coming up during that time. And then we also had the sun, and I'll talk about this next, but the sun is conjunct Venus and Libra. So those two were opposing each other, those two sets and pairs of planets. And it was super intense, especially on the other side of it. Like the first few days of last week were just, woo. So if you felt that, I feel you, I am with you. A lot of people I know felt that as well, and it was super intense. So now we've just gone past the last quarter phase of this moon cycle. It was in, I think yesterday or late yesterday in Cancer. So the sun's still in Libra, the moon was waning through Cancer. We had our last quarter square. Now the moon has moved on into Leo and will continue to wane until our new moon next week on Tuesday. which is also an eclipse. So we are kind of steeping in the energy of this eclipse season already. We have been since the full moon. And now we have our first eclipse of the fall coming up next week on Tuesday. So that'll be a new moon partial solar eclipse in Scorpio. Scorpio season begins on Sunday. So I will also be getting very into that in an interview that I'm going to do with my friend Valerie on her podcast, and I'll be posting that on our channels as well. So stay tuned for that. We're going to have a whole in-depth discussion about all about the eclipses as well as the Mars retrograde. And then to get to Venus, Venus has been traveling with the sun now for a while. Venus has been invisible for a while. And we have a very unique thing happening with Venus this month, actually in a few days. When Venus makes a conjunction with the sun, so at the same degree as the sun, it's called a Venus star point. Now, this happens twice in Venus's cycle, once while Venus is retrograde, and then when Venus is on the other side of the sun. This upcoming Venus star point is going to happen at 29 degrees of Libra on the 22nd. And this is the first time in all of our lifetimes that we will have a Venus star point in Libra. What does that mean? I do not know. We shall see. It's very curious. I've done a little bit of research on it. I will put a link in the show notes as well to a wealth of information about that from the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. There have been many interviews and things done with Venus experts and experts on the cycle, and a wealth of information I will point you to on that. But just know that's also in the astro weather kind of happening. There's a lot of Libra energy going on with that in particular. The sun is still there. And then now we have Mercury well past the retrograde period at this point. We're past the post shadow. Mercury right now is at 11 degrees of Libra moving forward, and we're well into the new Mercury cycle at this point as well. So that is the gist of what's happening in the skies at the moment. As the eclipses begin to happen, as we get into Scorpio season, as the Mars retrograde starts, it's just going to get more and more intense. So my best advice going into this energy at this point in time is to just be sure that you're staying grounded. If you need time away from people or things that stress you out, you're probably going to feel that. Take it if you can. Just try and stay calm, stay centered. And it's really important to be sure that you take the power and the pause at this time, and that you're responding to things rather than reacting. Very much related to the Mars retrograde energy, but also everything else that we're experiencing. At the end, I'm going to pull a card from Rebecca Campbell's Work Your Light deck. That'll be kind of a collective reading for everybody at this time. So we'll do that in a little bit. That is our Astro Weather Check for today. And now I'm going to get into my healing journey. And it took a while for me to kind of go back in time throughout my entire life. I just turned 42 on the 6th of October. And this is where doing the show is so helpful for me, because this is where my personal alchemy comes in, because I go back and I revisit these experiences and I get to transmute and recollect and go back into these experiences now, being on the other side of them, you know, how they helped me on my journey, but kind of how difficult some of these were during the time. And I get to reflect on that and transmute this in my own being and then bring this forward to you. I've had very many things throughout my entire life that have been either something like simple or, you know, traditional, or just a normal, quote unquote, normal injury, like a broken bone or that kind of thing. But I've also had things that have been very mysterious, not knowing where they came from or how they started or what the hell was going on at the time. So everything that's happened has sort of put me in the two worlds, really, of Eastern and Western medicine. And throughout my journey, I find that vibrational medicine, energy healing, healing arts. I mean, this is why I'm here talking to you now, have been more helpful to me because it's a more holistic approach. And I mean holistic in the, traditional definition of the word holistic, but also like holistic, like WHOLE. Because the methods that I've come across when the traditional Western therapies or treatments or whatever weren't working, have the Eastern or energetic methods, or just changing my diet or something like that, not going the pharmaceutical route, fortunately for me, I have found work better because they get to the root of the problem. And I feel that there's so much history in the ancient ways that we used to heal with herbs, and how I got into aromatherapy and becoming an aromatherapist, and astrology to an extent too. There's a whole branch of astrology that's medical astrology. So as these things have come into my awareness and across my path as a result, or not as a result, of some physical condition or discomfort that I was experiencing, or dis-ease, that dis-ease word, it's been very interesting. So I think it's very important to share this as sort of the introductory series and part of this season 2, because like I said, I have Chiron in the first house. So this is very specific and unique to my journey and my path to embodiment in this lifetime and my own healing. And like I said, I have Pluto in the 6th house of my chart. So that can speak very much to illness and physical things that happen, or health things that happen, that cause transformation and death, rebirth cycles, and regeneration. 6th house is all about our health and our daily practices and our routines. So as I shared in the first episode of this podcast, this really comes into play for me in particular with the energetic setup I have in my chart with Chiron in the 1st, and then that being that point of the yod that I have with Pluto as part of it. So I went back in time and the first thing that I can remember is when I was 4 years old. I got the chicken pox. And for me, this was not your typical chicken pox experience. I had a seizure when I was home. My mom found me. I had a seizure, and they called the ambulance, and it was my first ever ambulance ride. And they ended up discovering that I had the chicken pox so bad that they were not only on the outside of my body, but they were also on the inside. So it was I forget how long it was, multi-day hospitalization. I had them on the bottoms of my feet. I remember being there and my mom putting me up on a chair in the hospital room and just covering my body in that calamine lotion, that pink stuff. They were everywhere. I couldn't even walk. I had to walk on my toes when I was up and around in the room because it hurt so bad because they were on the bottoms of my feet. And I remember them coming in and doing all kinds of tests on me and EKGs, and my mom being there, and just, I wasn't scared, but I mean, I was 4. So my memories, these are kind of like my first real memories of my childhood. And it was just, I went to the hospital, I got the treatment, they monitored me, and as chickenpox do, they went away. I still have a scar. I have a chickenpox scar under my left eye. So that is one memory from that time period and that experience that is a constant reminder every time I look in the mirror. But very interesting experience being 4 and having that happen, and having it happen in such an extreme way, especially with the seizure. So that was kind of my first typical thing that happens when you're a kid, but in overdrive in my experience. So that happened when I was 4, and then I can't remember what age I was, but at some point a couple years after this, I broke my arm. It was my left wrist, actually. I was at my grandparents' house and I was playing around and racing my grandmother down the steps in their old house in Atlantic City. And I fell down the steps and broke my arm. And this wasn't really discovered that it was a broken arm until a few days later. I used to have this rocking horse when I was a kid, and I couldn't put any pressure on my left arm to rock the horse. And that's how it was sort of figured out that there was something else that was wrong. My grandfather thought that I just hurt my head, but no, it ended up being a broken arm. So that was a pretty typical experience, not as extreme as the chickenpox experience. I had a cast. I remember my dad drew like Big Bird on the cast and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't awful. It wasn't traumatizing like the chickenpox experience was. It was a broken arm and it healed. I had the cast on and, everything was fine. I didn't have to have any surgeries or anything like that, thankfully. So that was another thing that happened when I was a kid. And then, so this one I'm going to touch more on in the next episode. But when my menstrual cycle began, I started getting these debilitating migraines. I was 11, I believe. And the first time it happened, it was extremely scary because for me, I get what's called aura and I lose my vision. So that happens first for me, and then the pain of the migraine sets in. So I was hanging out at home in the living room watching TV or doing something, and then all of a sudden I started losing my vision. And I had no idea what was happening. And then the pain started to set in. So the onset of this, definitely hormonal, related very much to my menstrual cycle, and has been for, ever since they started. But interesting to say the least, having that happen at 11 years old, not knowing what the hell was going on, and then having this intense, awful pain on top of menstrual cycle pain and all the things that come with that. So I dealt with migraines pretty regularly from age 11 until my 20s. And it just became a normal thing. I'd know when they would start because I'd start to lose my vision, and then I'd, just be sure that I was in a place where I didn't have to drive anywhere or do anything if that was possible. I remember taking final exams in college with migraines because I had no other choice, really. So the only thing that really helped was sleep. I would, the pain would start, my vision would go, I'd sit and wait for it to come back. Then the pain would come in, and I had a whole journal and a rating scale of 1 to 5 for pain levels, and just went to sleep. I would go to sleep for about 3 hours and it would become bearable. And then for like 1 or 2 days after, I'd have what I call a migraine hangover. When I would stand up really fast, my head would pound. Some of them came with neck pain for me, but it was mostly in my temples. And doctors tried different medications for me. Imitrex was one of them, and I can't remember the other few, but they didn't work. They didn't work at all. So this was this is probably the first experience where it became more studying and getting into non-traditional therapies and changing my diet. I'll talk all about the dietary changes and more about this in the next episode. But this also came into play a lot in my aromatherapy studies as well. I rarely get them at this point, but when I do, I have an inhaler that I use that has a blend of frankincense, spike lavender, and rosemary. And that works wonders for me. I start inhaling that as soon as the aura starts and the migraine's gone. So it's amazing the things that I've discovered along the way in this healing journey of experiencing migraines. So that started, I think, around age 11, like I said. And then the next big thing that happened was throughout high school, I ended up suffering from Epstein-Barr. And I almost forgot about this one. And it took a while to figure out, because that's one of those things that just, it's hard to put your finger on. I was just so tired all the time. And I was very athletic in high school. I did cross country, swimming for 1 season, and crew for 3 seasons. So my freshman, sophomore, junior years, very athletic, sports all year, pretty much. And we thought initially that it was from that, because I was just maybe overworking myself, going to school and doing sports all the time. But it wasn't. I ended up finally getting a blood test. I forget what doctor. But a lot of these things have also been multiple medical professionals and experiences with different branches of medicine. But they ended up figuring it out, and it was just like, there's no real treatment for it. You just have to kind of rest and make sure that you rest and take care of yourself and kind of wait it out. Thankfully, it didn't turn into mono, but I definitely had the whole Epstein-Barr experience, and that lasted a really long time. I remember it being at least an entire year, if not more. So that thankfully went away on its own after we figured out what it was. That was an interesting experience. That was a little scary. Migraines, scary. Epstein-Barr, scary. Especially, being that young. When I was in high school, it was ages 13 through 17. So lots going on during those years, especially, like I said, with menstruating, starting, and all of that. And then just trying to do my best and apply myself and get good grades and all of that. And then having these health things to deal with on top of that was very challenging. So the next thing that I can remember when I went back, I'm pretty sure the one that I'm going to discuss happened before the other one. I have my time frames a little bit mixed up, but this next one was extremely mysterious and also very scary. I started getting, I think this, all right, so let me backtrack a bit. I'm pretty sure this was when I was in my early 20s. And I started getting these sores in my ears and around in my nose and on my legs. And they were filled with liquid, I guess is the best way I can describe it. And they hurt. They were super, super painful. I think I even had one on my eye at one point. And I had no idea what it was. I mean, I live at the beach. There's marshes and stuff. So I think the best thing I can relate this to was experiencing chiggers. If you've ever experienced chiggers, they like nest in your skin. And these liquid packets or sores are like similar to that experience. Extremely painful. It was getting worse. It started to spread. So, like I said, it started in my nose, I think, and then my ear, then the eye and the legs. So I went to the doctor and they did samples, and it ended up coming back as MRSA. And the doctor calls me and she's like, have you been visiting anybody in the hospital or had any surgeries or anything recently? And I was like, no. And she's like, well, you have MRSA. And I said, what? How is that even possible? And to this point, I have no idea. She had this theory that it might have been from the grocery store, just from the dirty carts. And that's the theory. Can't trace it back. Have no idea how it started. So there's a typical round of antibiotics for MRSA. She started me on those. They didn't work. I mean, it helped a little bit, but it didn't really clear up completely. So she referred me to an infectious disease specialist. So I went to the infectious disease specialist, He then put me on several different rounds of other antibiotics, and I think it was the last one that we did actually worked, and the infection completely cleared up. Again, strange. Western medicine worked. I'm not quite sure still to this day what that was all about, but I can definitely tell you now that being an aromatherapist, I probably would have tried topical solutions with essential oils and making myself a lotion or something like that. The antibiotics were extremely harsh on my body. If you're a woman, you know what typically happens. I'm not going to mention it. With antibiotic rounds, they just kill all the good bacteria too. So that was a very, again, multi-month, I believe, experience. And now every time I have something happen, like I had my surgery, I always have to check off that I had MRSA. It's not really an alarming thing to anybody, it seems, at this point, because it's not like an active infection, but you still have to check that box off on a form if you're going in for a surgery or something. And when I tell the story about it, it's sort of like, yeah, it was just this thing that happened and we don't know where it came from. And I finally got it handled and it cleared up. Very strange. That happened in I think it was the early 2000s, I'm guessing. The next thing that happened was, I'll talk more about this when I talk in the next episode about my dietary changes, but I had a very interesting experience with upper GI problems, which I'd never had before in my entire life. This was during the time that I shared about in my Saturn return experience with my ex. So I'm sure there was very much stress related at this point, kind of looking back. But every time I ate, after I was done eating, I would get extremely nauseated to the point where I would almost get sick. And I'd have to sit in the bathroom for like an hour after every meal and just breathe and try and get past the nausea. Went to the doctor and she put me on one of the reflux medications, and my symptoms were nausea and stomach discomfort, and the side effects of the medication were the same exact symptoms I was experiencing. So I was not thrilled about that. I think it was Nexium or one of those. So that was the surface diagnosis and treatment from, traditional Western medicine. The medicine didn't really work, just like kind of with the migraine experience. So this was, again, a many month thing. I was dealing with it for a while before I figured it's probably time to go get this checked out. And once I reported back to her and I had my follow-up, medicine wasn't working, she sent me for an upper GI. That was horrible. The stuff they make you drink is absolutely disgusting. And then having to hold it while they take the scans and the images, just, ugh. If you've ever been through it, you know what I'm talking about. That was mysterious. Medication didn't work, went for the test, they found nothing, and it ended up just going away. Weird. Very weird. No idea. Probably definitely stress and energetically related to all the things that I was going through at that time. That you can hear all about and learn all about in episode 8, my Saturn return experience. Then, so now we're in about 2006. And I'll talk again more about this in depth when I talk about in the next episode. But my dad had to get stents put in. He had his own journey with this weird neck pain he was experiencing every time he exercised, went to his doctor. Doctor referred a heart cath, and he ended up getting stents. And this was right around the same time as my mom's cancer diagnosis. Again, everything that I shared in episode 8, my Saturn return experience. There is a history of heart conditions in my family. My grandfather died of a massive heart attack, and he had his own aorta, I forget what they're called, but he had his own issues and things happening, aorta hernia, I believe it was. And he had other surgeries related to that, ended up passing. My grandmother had dealings with congestive heart failure. These are my dad's parents. So then my dad was on statins for forever. He's still on them. And this gets concerning at this point when what his condition, the doctors typically refer to as a widowmaker. So I start reflecting on this, like, what does this mean for me? I tend to take after more of that side of the family. History of many people dying early, around 50, of heart attacks, heart conditions, that kind of thing. Now, energetically, I know what this is all about, and I'll get to this. For my last share, the last health experience I experienced, and I start thinking, oh shit, is this what I'm in for when I'm in my 50s? Like, is this going to happen to me? What does this all mean? So the fact that it was pretty much happening right around the same time as this upper GI thing that I was experiencing with stress and all of the things I was going through at that time, it was a little bit of a wake-up call. So this is when I really seriously got into healing with food and dietary changes and learning about what's in our food and all of that. Next episode, but this was the catalyst. This was the thing that sort of sparked that in me, and things that I still follow to this day as far as how I eat, what I eat, how I look at food, all of that. So very stressful time with this happening concurrently with everything else that was going on. And then I'm having this weird upper GI thing. And it was just, like I said, a wake-up call. So more about that in the next episode. And then the next thing that happened, which was also kind of a extreme mystery to an extent, was I ended up dealing with a very serious heavy metals toxicity problem. And I think this is now, oh God, what year was this? Definitely after 2010. I'm not quite sure, but it was, again, this was a multi-year healing journey. And it went back to, I discovered from a natural medicine person that I follow, that the supplement that I was taking, I was very into shakes and protein shakes and that kind of thing at this point, but I wanted something that was, I think I was looking for organic and vegan at this point. I was sort of like weaning myself off of dairy, and I wanted a different powder to put in my smoothies than something that was based on animal milk. So I found this rice protein powder by this company called Garden of Life. And this person that I followed, still to this day, started testing food to see what kind of contaminants were in it. Lots of things that are, on the label, it says organic and this and that, and it's supposed to be good. He started testing that and like pet foods and stuff, and found out that a lot of these things are contaminated with heavy metals. And the one thing that he put out was the exact brand and supplement that I was putting in my protein shakes for months. Thankfully, this was a piece of information that I had. This was not something that I was experiencing physically. Thankfully, it didn't get to the point where I was experiencing the toxicity that some people experience, where they're like hairs falling out and they're having neurological problems. I was probably on the verge of that because this stuff just stays in your body and compounds. So I asked my doctor to do a blood test. He reported what he found in his lab was it was contaminated with lead, tungsten, and cadmium, I believe. So I asked my doctor to test my blood for heavy metals, and I asked her to do mercury as well. Comes back very hot for lead, and mercury, I don't know where that came from. I don't know if it's just something that he didn't test for and ended up being in this powder as well. But I had very high levels of mercury and lead in my blood. So my doctor, the one that I've been seeing throughout this whole time she's been my physician for years, referred me to an integrative medicine heavy metal specialist. And I started seeing him, and he saw the numbers and got extremely concerned. And my first office visit ended up being a treatment where I was hooked up to an IV for like 2 hours. And then we started on the slow journey of getting this out of my system. This doctor was up in kind of southern North Jersey, what's a town called Tom's River, very far from here, considering working full time at the time and having to go see him a couple times a month for treatments and testing. And it was very expensive. My insurance didn't cover it. It was all out of pocket. So many trips to Tom's River, many tests that I had to pay for, and different medications to get the heavy metals out of my body. And you have to be very careful in this, it's called chelation process, because you have to make sure that it's released slowly so it doesn't end up somewhere else or contaminating another part. It has to be done methodically and slowly. We ended up clearing out the mercury first, and then the lead took a little bit longer. And the only medication that worked to get the lead out, like Led Zeppelin, was this medicine it was a holistic drug called plumbum. And I can't tell you how many tubes of that I went through. I had to take it every day and for a certain amount of time, and then we test again. And that finally ended up getting removed and out, and I tested negative for both mercury and lead. I think it was after maybe 2 years. And just another thing, another tool in my tool belt at this point, with learning about food and where things are sourced, and being sure that if you're taking a supplement or anything, and especially a powder form, I will not buy anything from a company that doesn't test their own products at this point. So big lessons in that, and how these companies can pretty much just lie on labels and say whatever the F they want if it's a supplement, because it's not really regulated. Big lessons there. Knowledge and information that I carry now at this point, going through this experience, that I can then help other people that are willing to listen, who are taking supplements and that kind of thing, just to be sure that it's tested. And we even went through, like, we had no idea where the mercury was coming from, so we had the water tested. There was a lot of things that kind of happened on the periphery of this too, that there are resources, like you can send water samples away to labs that will test things for you for specific things. So just lots and lots of information and knowledge and wisdom at this point that came in from that experience with what we put in our bodies. Very expensive, very long journey, very scary, but I was very grateful that my doctor put me on the route of the holistic and integrative medicine therapy, because I was very comfortable with the doctor that handled this for me, and he was fantastic. And I'm just grateful for the way that the journey unfolded for me, even though, like I said, it was very expensive and was a lot of time and took a couple of years to resolve. Then the next thing that happened was the development of the pilonidal cyst that I mentioned and told the whole story about in season 1, episode 3, my Healing the Root episode. I highly recommend going back to that one, because that was a very intense blending of Western and Eastern medicines. And that had a whole spiritual, energetic element to it as well. You can listen to that episode to learn all about that experience. I also have a series of blog posts on my blog about that, which are linked in the show notes for episode 3 of season 1. And then the most recent thing that I experienced was 2018, 2019, early 2020. I started getting this chest, go back to my story about my dad and my grandfather and my grandmother and that whole side of the family. I started having this very strange feeling in my chest. And I can only describe it as like someone was reaching in and just kind of like squeezing my heart. And it would happen. Sometimes it would be extremely intense, and then it would just go away. And this is another one of those things that was weird. I mean, I can't even, this was scary just considering my family history. So I made my first ever appointment with a cardiologist, and I went to see him, and he looked at my blood work, and my blood work was fine. Nothing kind of out of the ordinary or alarming or off the charts out of, the normal ranges. And he was a little bit puzzled too. And he had me do a stress test. Very interesting experience. If you've ever had one, you know what I'm talking about. And the results came back and everything was fine and normal. And he's like, I don't know. I get that a lot from doctors. I don't know what's going on with you. So I'm still seeing my network chiropractor at this point. So we start working on heart chakra work and self-love affirmations and all that. This was definitely still concurrently a stressful time. If you listen to my season 1, you'll know I'm going through figuring out what to do about my leaving my job and all of that. So elements of stress also in this, I'm sure, yes, but it really was a heart chakra opening experience for me. And it doesn't happen anymore. Once I started doing the energetic work and working with my network chiropractor on it, it went away. I do, thankfully, had the stress test and know that there's no problems there, thankfully. Nothing that I was afraid of happening to me, like what's happened to my father and my grandfather and my grandmother. So another interesting experience that had big energetic and spiritual undertones, but you kind of get that, alarm that goes off in your mind, like, oh my God, is this happening to me too? Like, what is this? This is weird. Like, you associate chest pains with heart attacks and that kind of thing. So, but it didn't come with any of the other symptoms that usually come along with that. So interesting experience again, as well, just like pretty much most of everything that I've already shared. That's the most recent one up to this point. I hope that I don't have anything else that happens anytime soon. I think that's enough. That's enough at this point. But like I said, getting in front of this microphone and telling these stories and alchemizing all of this emotionally, energetically into information and things that I just, got to tell the story, got to become Chiron at this point. So that is episode 1 of season 2, this 3-part series that I'm starting with. So I will put links to everything that I talked about in the show notes. The blog post that I wrote about Mars is my contribution to our monthly Sea Goddess Healing Arts Soul broadcast. We wrote all about mushrooms for October, which is really fun. And you can read there all about how I relate Mars energy specifically to adaptogenetic mushrooms, which is something that I do actually supplement with. And you can read some more about Mars and Gemini and the upcoming retrograde in my section of that blog post, which I believe is called Intelligence in the Darkness, is my section. So you can read the, my introductory material about Mars there. And like I said, I'll be creating more content and another podcast interview that I'll be sharing, but I'll also be touching on all of this in my Astro Weather Checks at the beginning of each episode now that I'm back to recording again. So I just pulled the card that I said I was going to pull. And like I said, it's from the Work Your Light deck by Rebecca Campbell. And the card that I pulled is Council of Light, Divine Orchestration, Helpers in the Subtle Realms. And this is a beautiful card. It has these black and white images of all these fantastic teachers and guides that we've all learned about, like Buddha and Jesus and Mother Mary. And they're all there, and then there's all this water and like a skyline in the background with, it looks like it could be the sun or the moon. I'm guessing it's the moon though, because it's dark in this picture. And it has all these points of light in a vertical pattern right down the middle of the card, leading into kind of like an as above, so below scene where it's like they're kind of standing in the middle and we've got this sky above and the sky below, and it's all connected by these points of light. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful card. So I'm trying to find the guidance in the book. Council of Light. Okay, 94. So the guidance from the guidebook for this deck from Rebecca is the Council of Light is a team of benevolent beings who are here to assist the raising of consciousness of the planet. They are here to help you achieve your soul mission and are guiding you every step of the way. However, because we live in a world where free will reigns, they cannot help you without your permission. If you would like their assistance, it is time to ask them. They can help with all kinds of requests. Nothing is too big or too small. Think of them as your personal team of helpers in the spirit realm. They are willing and ready to step in and get to work. What would you like help with? What tasks would you like to delegate to them? The Council of Light is a team of ascended masters, light beings, angels, and guides devoted to the rising of Earth and all humanity. If you are a light worker, it is from them that you receive your personal mission. Like a spirit world United Nations, they want to thank you so much for doing this work and devoting your life to uplifting the planet. Pray to them for clarity and guidance regarding your personal mission. Put in your requests and let them get to work. And then this is an activation card. And the activation says, hold the card to your heart. If you have the card, you can do that. If not, just hold your hand to your heart and say, Council of Light, I am ready to receive your help for fulfilling my personal dharmic mission. Thank you for guiding me with clarity every step of the way and for sending me helpers and experiences that delight my mind, body, and soul. I will put that activation prayer in the show notes. I think this is a really good card for everything that I shared at the beginning with the astro weather. This is a good way to stay grounded and centered at this time, is to just work with your spiritual team. And if you don't already, this is a cool time to kind of get into that. What's your mission? I mean, we talk about this in this podcast, discovering your soul's calling. What did you come here to do? And if you don't know, Spirit's a great helper in figuring that out. So that's the card. And then a couple other things that I wanted to share. This week, we have an upcoming, our first online soul circle with the Sea Goddess Healing Arts team. That's on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll put a link to that as well if you want to sign up. It's all online and we'll be recording it if you can't make it live. We're going to have the meditation and I'll be sharing more astrology tidbits, and there's going to be energy healing from the team, as well as a virtual crystal grid and virtual altar and crystal grid. And there might be a bit of sound healing in there. And then we're going to open it up because we feel like every member of our team has something incredible to offer. And Have you ever just wanted to sit down with all of us and have a chat? Because a lot of people ask for that. So now we're doing it. And we made it virtual because it's a lot easier for people to attend if you're not in the South Jersey area. So that is, like I said, Thursday at 7 p.m. Registration's still open. The energy exchange is only $11.11. So I'll put that link also in the show notes if you want to join us. We'd love to have you. And then let's see, we're doing a farmers market on Friday. The local organization that I've mentioned, Crops Communities Revolutionizing Outdoor Public Spaces, or Open Public Spaces. I think it's open. They have a grand opening of their first storefront at the Tanger Outlets in Atlantic City, and they're doing a 3-day farmers market in conjunction with that. We'll be there vending on Friday, so find us there if you're local. We'd love to see you. Come support us. Come support Crops. They're an incredible organization doing very important work here in South Jersey. So we have that coming up as well. And then next week is my part 2 of the Beauty and Basics of Aromatherapy workshop series at Island Therapy. I would love to have you, see you if you're in South Jersey and want to join us. That's in Summers Point. You can find that information at my website. I'll also put that link in the show notes. And I think that's it for now. I'm back on a regular recording schedule, so I'm hoping to maintain what I did last time, maybe 2 episodes a month, if not more. And I'm just really excited to get into the content. If you want to support the show, there's also a link there. If you're in a position to donate, I would very much appreciate that to keep this going. This is all free. This is my free offering at this point, so I would love show me some love that way if you can. I'd be very grateful. Like I said, the link is in the show notes as well. And that's a wrap for episode 1 of season 2. I'm so excited. Thank you for being here with me. And like I said, if you're new, please go back and listen to season 1 to get a feel for why I'm doing this and my own personal story and how I'm just trying to bring astrology down to the lived experience, because I think that's the most important way to make it relatable. And I'm sure if I went back and looked at the transits to my chart with all of these things that happened, they would be even more revealing. I'll probably end up doing that at some point when I'm in a research mode and have a lot more time. But thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and till next time. And as always, remember to be a maverick. Bye.